Well, and I think it's one thing to read something, but it's a whole other to experience. And I think there's probably some room for placebo too, when you read something and then experience the plant. If you've read something about it before actually trying it yourself, you kind of have expectations that certain things might happen as opposed to holding space for what naturally occurs.
There's a practice that I learned from Christopher Hedley. And Christopher Hedley was this amazing Tom Bombadil of an herbalist who lived in London. He passed away a few years ago on the autumnal equinox because he's Christopher. And he came, I had known him through like online circles and email and through correspondence, but he came to the International Herb Symposium one of the years that I was there. And so I got to meet him and hang out with him. And he did a class, and it's called the blind tea tasting. And what it entails is one person, the person, facilitating the class, makes a tea of an herb and doesn't tell anyone what it is. Nobody knows what it is. And initially everyone gets their tea and they just smell it. They don't taste it. They just smell it. And you might, depending on the herb, if I was doing this exercise, we might smell it for like 15 minutes. We might smell it for like a half hour. And people can say like, oh, I feel like my sinuses opened up, or like, oh, I feel more relaxed, or oh, I feel more aware. The goal of this particular exercise is not to be like, I think this plant is this, or to say, I think this plant has a lot of volatile oils. It's only to sort of like say things about what your body is feeling, not to interpret it, right? Mm-hmm. And then after some time goes by, everyone can take a sip and then see like what changes. And then after a little bit more time goes by, I let people sort of like sip at will and then keep collecting this information. And when I've done that, it's been really amazing because I've often come up with what would essentially be a better monograph on the plant than I've ever seen written down anywhere. Because when people know something about a plant, if they know what the plant is, they will automatically think to what that plant is supposed to do and be looking for that, and not necessarily be looking at the things that the plant does that aren't thought of, So for example, if we were tasting Damiana, everyone would be like, ooh, I feel excited. If they knew it was Damiana, but they probably wouldn't be focusing on the fact that Damiana is an amazing digestive herb or an amazing lower respiratory and upper respiratory herb, right? Because that's not what we think about with Damiana. And when the plant's unknown and we're just really feeling how our body is responding and reacting to it, it gets our, our interpretive head out of the way. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, it's still kind of intellectual, right? Mm-hmm. But what you're doing is you're just collecting the information and not having to solve it right away. And I would say that if there's one thing that I notice, not just in herbalism, but in the world in general, that I think creates problems, is that people feel like I want to learn things and get the solution all at one time. Mm-hmm. Like if I learn something, I don't want to just learn that something happens. I want to learn the hows and the whys and have all of the questions answered right away so that I know it. And first of all, like that doesn't work all the time. There's still a whole bunch of things we just don't know. Mm-hmm. Not because someone's not telling you, it's because we still don't know, what the answers are. But also, things that you take more time and to process and wonder about, you often learn in a more deep and full way, even if that learning isn't attached to a solution of like, oh, I learned this and now I know this. I learned about this herb and now I know that it does this, this, and this. You can be like, oh, the way that I think about plants a lot is, wondering. I like everything about the word wonder I like about. I wonder about plants and I notice things in them. And so rather than saying like, for example, oh, this plant is aromatic, right? Aromatic plants often have volatile oils. Volatile oils often act as expectorant or volatile oils act as expectorants, and they act as diuretics, and they act as carminative, and they act as circulatory stimulants, and they act as relaxants, and they act like this and this. So therefore, this plant has these volatile oils in them, and it does these different things. And the way that I would be more inclined to think about it is like, oh, I can perceive through interacting with this plant that it's aromatic. And I know that aromatic plants are often have their smell because of volatile oils. And volatile oils can do this or this or this or this or this. How is this plant manifesting that? How does it fall in line with what aromatic plants do? And where might it not? Like, where might it be different? Where might it do something unexpected or differently than that? And then my understanding of a plant is based on my relation to it at the time that I'm using it, which continues to grow and expand over time, just like it does with people, you know. And to me, that feels like a really just sincere way to interact with plants and, you know, help people with them and understand their virtues, is to be like, oh, this is a relationship that we're starting, and it unfolds, and that plants aren't things to like figure out and know anymore. People are things to like figure out and know, because we can, and often do, I think, have not super helpful responses to knowing things. So if I know something and then I come across information that contradicts what I know, I might not feel confident anymore, or I might feel defensive, rather than just being like, oh, that's interesting. You know, if we have this sort of like open-ended relationship where we haven't come to like a finality of like, okay, now I know this, I'm done, right? I've succeeded, I know this, I'm done with this, I can move on to the next thing. We can become defensive, we can become unconfident, we can, you know, not continue to learn more about something. And why do that when we can just remain open-ended about things and have an attitude of inquiry and discovery that doesn't have to have an endpoint of knowing?
Absolutely. Being in that place of wonder, as you said, where it's too easy to pigeonhole herbs too, in the ways that we kind of use them mostly, maybe, but there's so much else to the plants and at the different stages of the plant's life, and the different person we are at every time we take these different herbs too. So there's so much more to it on both ends. Absolutely.
Yeah, different people, different situations. And you know, so in the teaching that I do, one of the things, I'm talking to people about the different courses that I do right now. One of the things is to say that even though there's a lot of information that I cover in the class isn't about like, I'm going to totally simplify this. Like, there's 1,000 units of information, and if you remember 900 of them, you did a really good job, you know. That would be weird. That would be like conventional education, which I think is problematic, right? What I think is like, there is a certain way, like my goal in teaching isn't to teach people to memorize the information so that they know the information and therefore they know about the organ system, or they know about the herb, or they know about this or that, but that there's a way of thinking that I think helps us to have a better understanding of herbs and have a better understanding of health and wellness. And that's what I want to convey. And the information we can backfill later on. We can take our time in learning it. It doesn't need to be like a race or a rush to be like, oh, I got into herbs, I want to know all the things now so I know it, and therefore I'm good enough to use herbs. It's like, oh, I understand, you know, some of this stuff. And maybe at a certain point, and I still find this, like, I'll be learning from someone who knows different things than me and be like, wow, I don't know that at all. I have no idea what's going on here. But then when I look at how they're using herbs rather than how they're explaining how they use herbs, I'm like, oh, I would do that too. I just wouldn't ever talk about like something being serotonergic or dopaminergic or GABAergic, you know, like I don't think in those terms ever, except to explain to people that I don't really know them or understand them. But when I meet people who do think in those terms, and they use herbs that way. And then I look at the way that I use herbs. I'm like, oh, I guess I do understand that. That's just not the language that I used for it, you know, in the same way that I guess pretty much all traditional herbalism, you know, was built around story and analogies and, you know, ideas, qualitative ideas, rather than being sort of like quantified with information to justify it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.